Hey everybody, it's your pal Nigel Jenkins of Laughing Heart Music and LHM Records, and today my guest is Kerry Martin. Kerry is a childhood friend of mine who has worked as a radio host at campus and commercial radio stations. He was a music columnist for CBC Radio 1 for years, worked at CBC Music as part of the Searchlight competition in an associate producer role, and now works as a consultant with artists, organizations, and big companies alike. We had a great chat about all things music, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you as always to Music NL, the province of NL, and ACOA for supporting this video series. All right, cool. Kerry Martin, we're recording. How is Toronto today?
Man, it's fine, I guess. I never really leave my house anymore, so I'm just this is just me. This me and my two cats.
Yeah, you know, I've been like doing the work from home thing in Steadybrook for 2-ish years now,
Right.
and I love it. It's very nice to not have to go anywhere, and especially where like Stephanie's been pregnant now for a while. It's like been good to be home to help with that stuff.
I get that. I totally get that. And I mean, I think the difference is like I would love to be working back in Newfoundland too. Because like my backyard is my Portuguese neighbors who are barbecuing mackerel, which sounds fun. But my windows are wide open and they're smoky, and your backyard is like Marble Mountain. But also like I envy so much the fact that you're making it work, and you're making it work in Newfoundland, and you're banging it out, man.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up right away. Like part of this video series is like talking to people who are, artists or industry professionals from Newfoundland, living in Newfoundland. You've been in Toronto now like a bunch of years. Sort of what inspired or prompted the move to the Big Smoke?
Yeah, so it was my partner. She got into the Masters in Museum Studies program at the University of Toronto, and at the time we were living in Halifax, and I was working in radio, and she was working for Parks Canada. And when she got into that program, it was like, all right, let's pack it up and go. And I'd always said like, at some point I want to try out Toronto and see how that goes. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And she was like, well, this is the chance. And I had zero prospects here at all. So we literally packed up, came here, and it kind of felt like starting over in a way. Like I had a couple of meetings I worked for new cap stations on the East Coast, Newfoundland Capital, which are now owned by Stingray, I think. And just didn't work. It wasn't a good fit. I wasn't the right kind of person for the roles that they needed. So it was applying to like 10 jobs a day. But what caused us to move here, or what prompted the move, I suppose, is my partner got into the schools.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, when you say you weren't a right kind of fit for the stations, you mean when you got to Toronto?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because as I recall, they like basically built a station around you in Halifax. I don't know if that's an accurate recollection, Kerry, but you were at CKDU Radio, the campus station in Halifax, doing your show there, and then you, I'll say, graduated, for lack of a better word, to Radio 96.5 as their like full-time person there. And when that happened, living in Halifax at the time, I was like, oh, this is like the Kerry Martin station. Can you talk about how you went from being like a campus radio station host to like the main person on a significant commercial station?
Oh, totally. I mean, I stayed. I was at CKDU all the way through. So I started off at CKDU when I was in my second year of university, I think. And I really like what I wanted to do for my future. I couldn't really get the education for it by going to King's College where I went. I could get a journalism degree. I could get a broadcasting degree, but I couldn't get a music journalism degree. So Daryl, who is in Buttes, was the music director at the time at CKDU, and Jana Lauren was, I think, the station manager, and Laura Peak was the program director. All three of them made music that I really liked.
Yeah.
So partly it was like, I want to be friends with these super cool people. And the other part was like, I want to work in Canadian music. I want to do Canadian music journalism, and this is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
So I did that for a couple of years with a show that I had called The Great Canadian Broadcast, which was like the lamest, and I still think is the lamest name.
I don't know, buddy. I had like, it was like the True North show or like North Tunes or something worse than that on CKDU.
I don't know if it can be worse titling than what I did, but I appreciate that. Yeah, so I was at Radio 96.5 used to be Cool FM on the 96.5 band and FM band in Halifax, and they were planning a rebrand or a relaunch of the station as well. And we weren't totally aware of anything that was happening. We just knew something was going to change one day. And I was working in promotions and marketing there, between their street team and planning their events and whatnot. And I had done the street team thing for them the summer prior. And they knew that I was really into, indie and alternative music, and had a real penchant for, local content.
Yep.
And it wasn't immediate. Like, the station launched and I was still in the same role.
Okay.
And it wasn't until Christina Fitzgerald, who is now with Entertainment One, and after 96.5 went to Indie 88 here in Toronto, and she's amazing. She called me in and was like, "Do you want to just like give it a go? Do you want to try doing like the weekend?" The person they had doing weekends left, and she was like, "Do you want to do evenings and weekends?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do. This is exactly what I want to do." And they ended up letting me do basically, whatever I wanted, within reason. Like, I can play whatever I wanted, but I could have artists in the studio. I could basically bring the Canadian content aspect of it that I had at CKDU to an extent over to 96.5. So at one point I was Wednesday to Sunday, I was at Radio 96.5 and Q104, still in marketing and promotions.
Yeah.
And on Tuesdays, I'd be at CKDU, and Monday was my research day for CKDU. So it was 7 days a week. And and then I was still doing my degree. So it was a lot. Like, it was nonstop, but it was so much fun. And it honestly was, the hardest thing was leaving CKDU, because like, even still, I still listen to CKDU all the time, because you can listen online. So why wouldn't you? It's just like, it's such a window into like the people you would pass on the streets thoughts,
right?
And like, be that music or current affairs or whatever. And you don't get that everywhere else. And, the bigger stations are trying to get that, and you can't get it the same way. So, that didn't answer your question at all, but
that's fine. We'll work around lots of questions. That was one of my favorite things of being at CKDU too, though, was just like the freedom to play whatever you wanted. And like, I would get artists to come in who were, I felt like way above my pay grade to do interviews on my show and stuff. And, I put a lot of effort into preparing for them, but I know, like, having heard it from other people, you had like a stellar reputation as being someone who did really thoughtful interviews, and like you were well prepared and well versed. And I wonder if like you can talk about, do you consciously think about work ethic for yourself? You mentioned doing the 7 days a week thing. Is that like a part of your character that you acknowledge and are aware of?
I mean, no. I know what you mean, and that's super nice too to say that. I mean, honestly, it all came from a place of feeling like I didn't necessarily feel like I belonged in what I was doing, in a way. You know what I mean? Like, every time that you step into a new scene or a new position or whatever, I hear the word like imposter syndrome a lot. It wasn't so much that. It was more so like, you really have to earn your right to be here.
Yeah.
And if other people are coming in and they're bringing their music and they're bringing their things that they worked so hard on, and they drove here from wherever they drove here from, and people are listening at this time to listen to something that'll either take their minds off what they're doing or compliment what they're doing, you better be able to do something cool for them. It doesn't matter how many people or how few people it is. And that's definitely something for sure that was like always front of mind. So, I would get all their music ahead of time. I'd read over all their liner notes. I'd like email whoever I could from whatever I could, just trying to do some background research and trying to find like what they liked. And I couldn't pay them for their interviews, but I could give them a little something special on their way in. So like, make them coffee or like bring them whatever, you know, a little gift if I could, just to show that it really meant a lot to me that they were there. Just trying to build up like a comfort before we even got into the studio, because a cold interview is always awkward to listen to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the work hard thing, of course, that's always been a big thing for me. I think it's less realizing that I'm working hard, more so just obsessing over what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Which I always do. And, you know, when it's music, it's a really easy thing to 6 hours later be like, why am I now listening to Devo? You know? But yeah, no, it's a big thing for sure. And like, just to really like bring it back to like that work hard thing. My first job in radio was with VOCM in St. John's.
Nice.
And I got that job. I was on a fishing trip, and a guy from Corner Brook was like, hey, my uncle is looking for somebody to come and work board operating at VOCM. And I was like, oh man, I'd love to do that. I have no idea how to do it, but I want to work in radio, and I'm moving to St. John's for a while. And they were like, okay, you can do it, but you got to work hard, because if this doesn't work out, I'm never going to hear the end of it. And I like my uncle. So I was like, all right. So it all came down to like knowing that somebody was going to be paying attention. And then you get to VOCM and Hits FM, K-Rock, and all the other stations, Big Land and stuff that are out of that building on Kennett Road. And you're like, okay, this is a big thing. And whether it's pressure or teamwork, like you sink your teeth in really quickly, you know?
Did you feel that, you mentioned like feeling like you needed to like earn your place? Did you get that same sense moving to Toronto, like a much bigger market, much more competitive? How did that translate?
It hasn't. I mean, I honestly, like I've made a bunch of friends here. Like my life has been here for the past 7 years. And, you know, I do very much feel like when I go to a show, I don't feel like I'm out of place by any means. I don't feel like there's any lack of that, but I definitely still feel the need to, you know, to show that I care, and that I want to learn, and that I want to, you know, do whatever. And, you know, that meant, you know, pre-quarantine going to a bunch of shows, going to 4 shows, 5 shows, 6 shows a week if I can.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. There's a part of me that cares less what people think of me, you know, as I'm just getting a little bit older. But there's also that same part of me that cares so much more about people's impact on what I do.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I want people to enjoy themselves, and I want what I'm doing to like help people in whatever weird little way I can, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, talking specifically about getting older, can you like maybe share how it is that you've gotten so much more handsome as you've grown up?
Staying inside, staying out of sunlight, lots of vitamin C and D, running a lot.
Sorry, had to get it in there. You are a handsome guy. I guess some people might be listening to this in like a podcast format, so they might think I'm joking. I just want to be clear that I'm not. Toronto venues, like pre-quarantine, what venues were you frequenting, or what are some of your favorites?
Well, I live in the West End, so I live like a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Baby G, which is right down the street from me.
Yeah.
I love the Baby G. That was I feel like that was like a jacuzzi store when I first moved here, and something else.
Yeah.
So now it's like a punk venue. Directly down the street from that is the Lula Lounge. I love the Lula Lounge so much, because I've seen jazz shows there. I've gone to salsa night and learned how to salsa dance. They just do such cool stuff. And then the Garrison, for sure. Like the Garrison is right down the street from me as well. And it's just a cool venue. Like I've seen Pup play there. I've seen like Trampoline Hall sessions there, which are like, you know, kind of comedy, for lack of a better word, sets. Right. And yeah, those are some of my favorites. The Drake is at the bottom of my street. The Gladstone is also just down there, which is now closed, but will reopen again soon, like everything else. And I don't know, I guess the obvious ones, the Horseshoe.
Sure.
You know, Lee's Palace is fantastic too. I think the Opera House. I biked by the Opera House in the East End recently. I was like, God, I hope all these places come back.
Yeah.
Because like, you hear about the history of them and how long they've been around. And like the Horseshoe, I think it's the 50s. The Opera House has been like a movie theater or something touching on entertainment since like I think it's like the early 1900s or something like that. And it's like, to have this right now risk the livelihood of all these places that have been so important in, not just Canadian music, but international music coming through and introducing itself to Canadian audiences for so long. Like, that's terrifying.
Well, it's interesting too, I think about just like the Canadian venue landscape more broadly, and I might be making an assumption here, but it feels like a uniquely kind of big city thing to have had stable historical venues like that over decades and even centuries. I think about like our hometown of Corner Brook, Daddick, Casual Jacks, what was it? White Horse? Was it White Horse?
The White Horse was Daddick, and it was also Club 709, and it was also something else. Like, it's been so many bars.
Well, and now, we've got the Rotary Arts Center, which is a beautiful new theater popped up over the last few years. But in smaller centers, I would assume it's probably true other places that there's more of a revolving door of venues. Whereas in a big center like Toronto, you can have these like monolithic, super established venues over long periods of time, which is like a really beautiful thing. And I agree. I hope they don't disappear.
Yeah, man. I mean, just on that note too, I did a little with my own band. I did a tour on the West Coast last year, and
Rough Spells. Your band, Rough Spells.
Yeah, exactly. And my family band, and we played a show in Vancouver, and it was at like someplace in like East Hastings. It was odd, but then we went to like Cumberland on the island and played in like a Masonic temple and like a bunch of other places. So these huge spaces that are music venues, but not really. Like, they're like event spaces, and like, playing at like Legions and stuff like that in smaller areas are severely underappreciated. Those venues are super cool. But I know what you mean. Like, to have like a Massey Hall or to have a Horseshoe, it's almost like the iconic aspect of like those city places. They're not invincible though. They're really not, and that we're seeing that now.
Yeah, with a Massey Hall, like, I wonder what the draw is of the venue. You know what I mean? Like, what are the number of tickets that sell no matter who goes in there because it's a Massey Hall show? You get that kind of like mystique and value and X factor out of a space like that.
Big time. I mean, any artist that you talk to who plays a show there. Like, I interviewed Chad Van Galen one time when he was opening for Constantine's at Massey Hall.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal for me because I got to interview him at Massey Hall, like in those like the basement dressing rooms. And he had just finished his set. He came downstairs. The last thing he wanted to do was be talking to me. And Constantine's were about to play. And he was like, sorry, man. He's a super nice dude. He was like, sorry, man, can we wrap this up? I really want to go hear these guys play. And he's like, they don't play shows every day anymore. And I was like, I get it. So I was packed up. I was like, it was nice to meet you. And he was like, no, grab a beer and let's go watch the show. So when you go to Massey Hall and watch a show and you're backstage, you're on stage. There is no real backstage. The door opens and you're literally stage left. And I'll never play Massey Hall, but
never say never.
That moment, I mean, who knows? Winston Churchill played there in like the 60s or 50s or something. People went there to see Dylan go electric. Like, it's like, it's possible, but it's not going to happen. And just standing there and being like, when you're playing there, you're not looking out at a crowd. You're looking up at a crowd.
Yeah.
And you're also looking at like the amazing architecture that was whatever the time is. And you can get like a glimpse of like, the chairs, the overall build of it, the colors of the ceiling, the wood itself of the stage. Like, it truly is iconic. Yeah. But it's partly because it's been afforded, the name, like you're saying, Gordon Lightfoot recorded there, Neil Young recorded live shows there. Mm-hmm. There is no lack of amazing artists who have played there, right? So, but I want to see more recordings from, smaller places too, for that exact reason. Like, Neil Young insisted on going back to, I think it was Omimi, like 3 years ago or something, and performing for a bunch of people. And I don't think people were super jazzed to be driving from St. John's, sorry, where am I? Toronto, but they did it, and it
Yeah.
was amazing because it's singular. At that
Yeah.
point, the show goes from being a show in a known venue to being a singular moment.
Well,
That's
and I
important.
wonder how much more of that is going to be happening out of the pandemic too, because I know a lot of venues are setting themselves up to be able to like live stream direct from the venue and are hoping to continue doing that sort of thing even when restrictions are lifted. It's like I think maybe one of the silver linings of this is that venues are going to be doing more sort of one-off, unique recordings of shows.
Yeah.
That could be really cool just for the scene generally.
Yeah, man. I mean, I guess it has to happen that way, right? Like everyone wants live music, and studio recordings are fine and dandy, but people want live music. And if you're a fan of somebody, you want to hear that slight interpretation of whatever off the floor sounds like
Yeah.
for them. And yeah, so I totally agree with you. And of course, venues are going to be using their spaces as much as they possibly can. And I'm excited to start seeing more of that stuff. I'm excited to start hearing more of that stuff too. And yeah, hopefully. But I think you're right. It will be that for sure sooner than we know it.
Yeah, maybe just to like circle back, Kerry. So we've got like your timeline sort of up to 96.5 and then leaving to go to Toronto, landing, no connections. How do you wind up at CBC and then working for oh my God, I'm missing the name now. The
Searchlight?
Searchlight. I was going to say the songwriting competition.
Yeah,
Searchlight.
It was non-stop cold calling. Honestly, I had a very fresh journalism degree. I had just gotten it before I came here. I had experience in radio, but I had little experience in cultural affairs. Current affairs and cultural affairs for that matter, actually. And I always wanted to work for the CBC, ever since I was young, it being one of the 3 radio stations that we'd get in Corner Brook. Like, it was everything to me. And yeah, I would look up, the direct numbers, because you could go to like cbc.ca/ whatever the show was, and you would get all the different shows depending on what you would type in. And there was always a contact me, or a contact, or like info or questions, or to contact the producer, do this or that. I emailed every single one, like every single one within Toronto, and there's a lot of shows filmed in Toronto, and never got a single answer. And then then a friend of mine reached out to me and was like, so you obviously want to work in radio, because I was telling her about it. And she was like, are you a part of the Toronto Radio Club? I was like, no. It sounded way too like the name it would be to be real. So she invited me to this Facebook group, and sure enough, it was all of these amazing people who had these extensive backgrounds in journalism and broadcasting, and they would meet up once a month, and there would be anywhere from like 20 of them to like 50 of them.
Wow.
And they would invite a guest who would come and talk, and then people would just literally work on each other's demo reels or story pitches, or they would trade contacts. It was amazing. And from there, somebody invited me, when I told them what my goals were and the fact that I felt like I couldn't get in the door, they said, well, CBC is hosting these kind of lunch and learns for freelancers. And it was a short-lived thing. I don't think it still happens, but there was one particular one with Anna Maria Tremonti interviewing Carol Off. It was like, come on, So I went, and I felt weird calling myself a freelancer because I didn't know what the word meant. And, and I felt like I was lying, really I did. So I'm in the room, and I'm just listening to these two like titans of journalism industry trade off stories about like, being journalists of, war, or, sitting in the room with some of the biggest names in, our modern history and interviewing them. And then it ended, and I met a couple of people in the room. I was that person that was very much like, looking to meet as many people as I could, asking if there were opportunities. And then there was a clipboard, and the clipboard was to sign up for the next one. So I did
Okay.
sign up for the next one, and I signed up for the next one and the next one. And like 3 months went by, and I had gone to several of these. And finally, a woman who I had met in the first one, Joan Melanson, who's from Nova Scotia, told me, she said, you were saying that you were looking for some experience in production. There's a show here called Metro Morning that's looking for a producer. Metro Morning is like the super show of Toronto. It's what Matt Galloway hosted before The Current. And she called me in to be a chase producer, like part-time chase producer. And I did that for several months. And it wasn't until someone posted in the Toronto Radio Club that CBC Music was looking for an associate producer of Searchlight that I got a chance. I applied and I reached out directly to the senior producer on Facebook because he was a friend of a friend. Yeah. And I was like, I'm in the building. I love music. Music is my life. Canadian music is everything to me. And he was like, if you're here, just pop on down to the second floor. So I did.
Yeah.
And, I still had to interview and everything like that. But within a couple of weeks, like I had moved from CBC Metro Morning to CBC Music. And then contract to contract, I was there for like 3 years, 4 years or something. Yeah. A lot of projects.
And was that at the very outset of Searchlight? Was that like year one of Searchlight?
No, I think it was year 3 or 4.
Okay.
Because the first couple of years of Searchlight, it wasn't really just solely music based. It was like the first year of Searchlight, it was like searching for Canada's like greatest like music festival. And I think the second year was like greatest like music radio station or something. Like I wasn't there. And then they did a year of artists of music, and it grew from there. And I think I came in the next year.
Okay.
And then I was there for 3 years after that doing that program. But doing that program, which was like a 3-4 month program, then I still had like 8 months of the year to fill. So I worked on all their special projects. And it was always going from one 3-month contract to the next 3-month contract, which was a lot of fun. I mean, it's not something that I think I could do forever, because who can go on 3-month contracts forever?
But living fast and loose and security free.
Yeah, right. But it was the best. Like I made the majority of my good friends doing that. I still play on the softball team. Like it's if softball ever becomes a thing that we do again. But I loved it. I really that was my favorite thing to do, working at CBC Music.
Yeah, I mean, for folks who might be listening or watching who don't know, Searchlight essentially was like an emerging talent discovery contest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like working that program or that that contest for all those years, were there things that you identified as like potential markers or signals of an emerging or a new artist who had a lot of potential to like take it to the next level?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one thing that set a lot of people apart from others was just their willingness to, I mean, go the extra mile is not what I mean, but it's the first thing coming to mind. And what I mean by that is like, it's one thing to submit your song, or it's one thing to write a song, or it's one thing to pitch a song, or however you want to look at it. Yeah. It's another thing to write the music and then publish the music and then put out a plan for how you're going to market that music and communicate it to people and get it out there to people. And, several times I saw artists coming out of that who are now full-time, super, super successful artists who maybe they didn't win their province category or the national category, but you could tell that they were going to be something huge. And it was never my choice of who wins. My job was to make sure the music got to, stations across Canada and make sure that it got in people's ears. But, hearing a song and saying, holy smokes, like this is something totally different. And then seeing that those artists are like on their way up in their careers, in a big way, or like, oh wow, this is part of something huge and I want to watch it better. And like Hillsburn are a great example of that. Like they submitted Farther in the Fire, and we listened to it. This is an out of control song. And I think we reached out to them to see if they were okay with having their music played on CBC Halifax, I believe,
Yeah.
and instant response, full on, like, this is what our plan is, this is what it's part of, this is what it's going to be, these are all of our socials, it was like, they know what they're doing. They're actually going for this right now. And there's nothing wrong with writing music in your bedroom and just putting out music for people to take in. But
For
yeah,
sure.
people who realize that being a musician is so much, a professional musician, sorry, is so much more than just writing music and giving it to professionals. Like, that'll set you apart instantly, for sure.
Yeah. Well, with Hillsborough, I mean, they've always been supremely organized and diligent.
Sure.
And it's just like, I mean, for me in the role as like artist manager or label with that act in particular, it makes it so much easier to do all of the little things that you need to do on the admin side, the marketing and promotion side. If you've got an act who has a clear vision of who they are and what they hope to accomplish, it's just like, okay, well, like now that I know that this is where you want to head, I know that these are the little pieces I need to tack on along the way to try and make that happen. Because it's,
Right.
man, you can do just about anything with it, from, like you said, being a bedroom musician to just throwing stuff up on SoundCloud to like really trying to make a go of it professionally and aiming at the Junos or aiming at the
Yeah,
Grammys if you've got that potential. And
totally.
yeah, what a
Well, and
nice,
that's something that I wanted to ask you too, is like, are those goals that, like, as a manager and as someone who's working closely with labels, like, is that something that you find artists identify? Like what are your goals? Like, what are the things that you want to do? And I remember I listened to the talk that you had with Brian Power as well,
yeah.
talking about, like, if you want to play, if you want to be comfortable, you're going to have to go across Canada like 1 or 2 times a year or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's what Brian was saying. We were talking specifically about, being able to sell 100 to 200 tickets per city consistently, and if you can do that and go across Canada once or twice a year, plus maybe some other markets, like you can live and have a sustainable career. And I mean, yeah, everybody I work with, I try and talk specifically about sort of goal setting with, because it's like, part of my job as a manager is managing expectations. Like, yes, we would all love to get a 9 review from Pitchfork. But why are we relevant to that publication? Or like,
Right.
I would love for all of my artists to be featured on Tiny Desk.
Yeah.
But are we there yet? And if we're not there, what are the outlets? What are the like playlists? What are the sync opportunities, the performance opportunities along the way that we can like gradually level up to that? I think there still is this like, there's this myth about discovery where I think people assume that with the one right song, connected in the right way, it's just gonna explode for you.
Or one hit from busting this thing wide open. Yeah.
And I mean, the reason people believe that is because in a very small number of cases it happens.
Yeah.
But often not without years and years of build up to it and years and years of preparation for it. So
Totally.
yeah, I mean, I've started very explicitly like across categories with my artists. How many tour dates do we want this year? Like, what do you need to make as a band, as individuals this year for this to be a sustainable thing? Like, how many syncs are we going to try and pitch for? And like, who are the music supervisors we're reaching out to? How many social media followers do we want to have at the end of the year? What are the playlists on all of the DSPs that we're trying to pitch to? It's like,
Right.
there's so much, and you
Yeah.
need to know what you're trying to do in each of those, because otherwise the hard part of it too is like, it's hard to know when you're succeeding.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and like you're saying, I mean, there's so much pre-work that you have to do, that oftentimes people don't do a proper postmortem on a project, because you do a postmortem when a project is done. And in something like a career,
Yeah.
You imagine that you're done when you've retired.
Yeah.
But in the music career, that's not how it goes. Like you're saying, like yearly, quarterly, however you have to look at it, you got to look at it that way and be your own project manager in a big way.
Yeah.
And deciphering data and marketing points can be so difficult. And seeing what your goals are and seeing that different people are interacting with your music than you thought, it might seem like a loss to the wrong person because they set their goals and they never had malleability to them or something like that, you know? Like,
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, you have to have your like your near-term goals and your big picture goals that you're shooting at. Like it's great to think about getting to the Junos or the Grammys someday, and those are going to be super attainable for some folks, but like you've got to win your Music Nova Scotia award category first, and then you got to get the ECMA. I think about, I did a chat with Kat and Andrew from Fortunate Ones that like I just put up on the internet today. And, you know, they've done that trajectory. They won the Music NL Awards, the ECMAs, they got the Juno nom. They've had #1 singles on CBC Radio 2. They've played 300 plus shows together across a bunch of countries. It's like, part of what I was trying to get across in my chat with them was like, here's an act that has been just like steady building and has had longevity and is doing it the right way and is getting better and better and better and better every year. And I think that's how you get to a point where all of a sudden you are just like, you know, you're Alan Doyle.
That's what happens, right? You start out, you play a show, you win your Music NL Award, Juno, then you're Alan Doyle. That's how it goes.
I think that's how he turned into Alan Doyle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, aren't we all turning into Alan Doyle in some way? Isn't that the goal?
Well, you might be with like your luscious locks, buddy, but I'm
not trying.
I'm a little limited over here.
The last time I saw Alan Doyle, we were doing an interview with CBC Radio 2, and we got this opportunity to have a musician in every Friday to talk about Canadian songs that they think should be part of the Canadian school curriculum. And
cool.
And I don't remember. Oh, we called it Get Schooled, and we were doing it every September for a couple of years. And Tom was still the host of Radio 2 Mornings at the time, and I was producing.
Tom Power.
Tom Power, exactly.
Yeah.
And I was producing for some reason, and we were asked by the executive producer, and like, you know, make a big chase list of artists that you want to have in. We'll do something really cool. We'll have a whole bunch of different stuff. And we did, but the first interview was definitely still Alan Doyle. And Alan was in town, and he came and he talked about a bunch of Ron Hines stuff too. And it was wicked. It was so great. And he was just super funny. And like you were saying, like my hair wasn't like this long at the time, but it was like that or something like that. Yeah. And him and Tom were in the studio, and I was in the control room, and they would just stop their conversation to comment on how my hair was shining in the light because there was one studio light just shooting at my head. And he said something like, I haven't seen a Newfoundlander look like you since Roger Maunder or something, who's like, Roger's like a filmmaker or something from Gander, I think, or Grand Falls.
It's too obscure a reference for me.
It was just a couple of like, it was so funny, and they kept calling me like the Bayman in the booth, because I guess I'm from outside of town, so
you know, you're a Bayman.
No matter where you're from, if you're not from St. John's, you're from the Bay. You know, whatever. And I guess that's not right.
The first interview I did for this video series was with Dean Stairs, and I tried to get him to explain the Townie-Bayman divide, and I think we've just summarized it pretty well here.
I mean, if you can get someone to define Bayman and the difference between Tips and Tibbs Eve and the actual thing for both those, like Tom has a degree in folklore, and I still don't totally believe what he told me about it. But yeah, no, it's a mystery that will never be solved.
I love all the Newfoundlanders that are in power in the media in Toronto. You know, yourself, Tom Power. I'm sure there's lots more that I'm not aware of behind the scenes, especially at CBC.
It's a good spot, man. And honestly, being at CBC here for several years, I ran into so many Newfoundlanders because it's like it's a storytelling thing, right? And you know, I don't know what it is. Newfoundlanders and CBC, it was a warm handshake, and there were Newfoundlanders on every show. And they really were like the lifeblood of like a lot of the character of a lot of those shows. And past tense, they still are. You know, which is great.
Yeah. I want to flip back to something else. You talked about, like, when we were chatting about goal setting a minute ago, you'd mentioned metrics. I would imagine in your current role, you see a lot of numbers. Like how are you thinking about and looking about metrics when you're sort of assessing new acts or current acts? Like, do you, maybe I'll front end this a little bit from my side where, you know, when I'm looking at an artist that I might potentially work with on the label side of things, I'll go to their Facebook to see how many likes they have. I'll go to like, you know, Spotify or their YouTube or whatever, see how many views they're getting, how many streams. Is that part of like what you do when you're looking at artists or new music that you're considering?
Not so much. And it never really has been. Like it was, I feel like so many things that I've applied to in the past as a musician, one of the main questions, and not just musician, but jobs as well, if they're public facing, a big question was like, would you like to include your social media? And seldom is it required, but sometimes it is. And, you know, that happens when you apply to festivals. I know it happens when you apply to grants sometimes as well.
All the time.
And and it's unfortunate because, like, you know, I think of like, you know, if Nick Drake was to be around today, he probably wouldn't have social media at all.
Right.
And that would be the best thing. Or like, you know, if Tom Waits, a young Tom Waits was to have been on social media, you think people are following, like, maybe they are, but it might have been for the wrong reasons, because oftentimes like your brand can get misconstrued. And that would mean that, you know, an extremely talented person could result in having, you know, a couple dozen likes of their family. And so no, I don't look that much into it. What really it comes down for me is like the music itself, and then I go and I see as many shows as I possibly can, and I find myself oftentimes more pleasantly surprised by the opener or like the first of the three bands than the main act, for exactly that reason. Like, and then you look them up and they have no followers, and you feel like you've touched on something. You know,
it's interesting. I mean, I love live music and festivals, especially for that reason. I went to the Sasquatch Music Festival in that's Washington, I think, right? Anyway, over on the West Coast, so that's not Washington. I was on a road. I was on a road trip with our mutual friend Gerald Coleman at the time, and we were going to Sasquatch because Queens of the Stone Age were playing, and Kid Cudi and Haim and a bunch of awesome acts. And it was the Sunday afternoon. This band I had not heard of before got on stage and just like blew my mind. And it was Tune Yards.
Oh, no kidding.
They've got like, what is it? No Water in the Water Fountain. It was that song. They did all of the percussive looping in that track live. And I was just like gobsmacked by it.
That's out of control.
Yeah, dude. How when you're like either personally or professionally, like how is that primarily how you're discovering music, or had been up till now, is the live side, or like digitally, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge like a wormhole kind of guy. Like I go deep into it, and I oftentimes don't come out for several hours. For me, it's research, and it always has been, and I'm never satisfied with whatever that first thing is that I look for.
Right.
And the suggested bar is always calling to me. If I search a video and I see like watch next, or if I'm on an artist profile and I see the related artists, I oftentimes go to all of those.
Right.
And also like there is no lack of ways to find cool new music now. And obviously for the past like 6 months, I haven't been able to go to shows.
Yeah.
And but before I would, you know, make sure to write down or buy the music of whoever I was seeing if I was a big fan of them. The last band like that for me was a band called The Blushing.
Okay.
I think they're from Austin, or somewhere in Texas. I'm not sure exactly where. I think it's Austin. And they were opening for, oh my God, it's a joke on a Star Wars name. Ringo Death Star is the name of the band and they were playing at the Monarch. And I was totally blown away by this super awesome shoegaze band that I still listen to every day. But I mean, it happens more often than not that I'll be listening to like, you know, a random, podcast or, you know, music mix by, you know, any number of like influencers or artists that I really like. And I'll come across a song that just kind of stops me dead in my tracks. And my favorite thing to do is take that song and put it into different parts of my life and see if it complements all those things. Like I'll listen to it before bed. I'll listen to it on my run. I'll listen to it when I'm just walking, because I walk everywhere. And then I'll just include it in the mixes that I listen to during the day, because I listen to like probably 10 hours of music a day. And
that's a lot.
it's a lot. It's starting to affect my hearing a little bit, because I don't listen quietly, and I'm starting to develop tinnitus. But whatever, I earned it.
I was going to say, lucky you that you're just starting to develop it. I mean, we played in a band together with our buddy Cameron Lawrence growing up, and I was not wearing earplugs or headphones back then, and he hit those Sabian V8s pretty hard.
Well, don't forget that when Cameron was playing drums, I was directly next to him, so my right ear is like permanently shredded, like deep down. Because I didn't wear like earplugs or like headphones or anything like that until I was like 18 or 19. And we played in bands for about 6 years before that.
Oh,
6, 7
buddy,
years.
like all of junior high and high school. And the way I remember it is like most days after school, jamming until late in the evening.
Yeah.
And eating mini pizzas out of Cameron's parents' microwave.
The little Napolis. Yeah. I love it.
It's funny thinking back to that time. I mean, I was taking guitar lessons from your older brother Matt, who was such an influence on the kind of guitar player I ended up being, because he would like sit me down and make me watch Metallica and Pantera videos and teach me the solos from these songs. How much of like an influence were your older siblings on you in terms of the musician and the music lover you've become?
I mean, it was everything. My sister was playing in bands on the West Coast at the time.
Yeah.
And she was playing in bands with like the people who went on to be in like the New Pornographers, and like Nico Case was in one of the groups with her. And
that's wild.
yeah, it's out of control. So like she was too cool for me to comprehend at the time. And like I remember her being like, "This is my friend like Carl's band Zampano," and like Carl is AC Newman from the New Pornographers.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Cool, boring." But then fast forward several years later, and I see them just shutting down the Danforth Music Hall, and it was like New Pornographers are one of my favorites, and Superconductor and Zampano and all the groups that he's been in. I just happen to love all of them. But for my other brother Matt, who my sister Maya, like I said, was living on the West Coast in Vancouver at the time. Matt was living in Corner Brook. Yeah. When he went to school at Acadia, he left all his CDs behind. And I was 11 when he moved. And he left me with like maybe 300 or 400 CDs.
Wow.
And I remember at the top of the pile were like Tool's Enema, Rage Against the Machine's Evil Empire. It was a real crazy mix. There was like a lot of like Fu Manchu in there, and there was like Caius. Yeah. And I would listen to all that stuff because my goal was like, I want to be able to like talk music with my brother when he gets back at Christmas.
Right.
So I kind of obsessively listened to all this stuff while still listening to like S Club 7 and like Insane, so that I could fit in at school. And I noticed that my musical influence was changing more so on like my brother's end of things when it was my turn to bring a mixed CD to school, because every student would get to put on their own music at lunchtime. And like it would just go like every day it would be like my turn, then Johnny's turn, then whoever's turn. And the day that I brought mine in, the first song was I Mother Earth's Raspberry, and the second song was it was like a letter to Harry Manback or something from like one of the Tool records.
Yeah.
And my teacher turned it off and was like, "What are you doing? Like, why would you do this?" And it still also had like Nelly Furtado's I'm Like a Bird on it and a bunch of other stuff, because that's still like a banger. But she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm great. Like I'm discovering all this music several years late, but still loving it so very much." Oh, the Tool song wasn't Letter to Harry Manback. It was it was Jerk Off from like mid-90s, which she really didn't like.
You've prompted three stories in my mind that I'll try and get through in quick succession. One is that my first radio show was in sixth grade at the elementary school in Gander. And I would play songs over the PA at recess time from like a booth they had. And it was
wicked.
Super fun. But then this one day I played Scar Tissue by the Chili Peppers. That's off Californication, I think, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
and
it makes sense.
It says something in a push-up bra. And one of the mothers of like a kid in the school was in there at the time and heard the words push-up bra being broadcast over the PA, and my radio show in sixth grade got canceled.
What?
Yeah, it was too bad. But anyway, it was too much for the young children in Gander at the time.
I mean, at that point in time, like, that's a lyric that's just going to pass right on over. And also, sorry, if you don't like that lyric, don't go to the mall anytime soon. You know?
Yeah, I would hate for you to walk by a La Senza.
Yeah. And if you don't like that, I've got some Chili Pepper lyrics for you.
Yeah, hey.
Oh, man.
Sir Psycho Sexy? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking of Stone Cold Bush. I mean,
okay.
But really there is no lack, right?
Yeah, yeah. Second story, back to, I think it was Cameron again. So I moved to Gander. This is eighth grade. I'm in a band with Cameron, and he comes over, and I've got two CDs that I had gotten for Christmas that year. One was The Color and the Shape by the Foo Fighters, still one of my favorite albums. Probably, I don't know what it would be for me, top 10, top 20 albums, but just in terms of the influence it had on me. And I had like an NSYNC CD or 98 Degrees or Backstreet. It was like a boy band CD that I had gotten the same Christmas. And Cameron took the boy band CD and snapped it in half. And was like, no, and then gave me like a Korn mixtape and Slipknot.
I believe that. I completely believe that.
It's true.
He asked me when I started playing in a band with you guys, like, so what kind of stuff do you listen to? And I told him what I listened to, and he was like, don't listen to like half those bands anymore. And I was like, okay, sir. He was super influential on the music that I listened to for exactly that reason, because he wasn't afraid to tell you if he thought the music you listened to sucked. And when you're young, you're like, well, I don't want what I listen to suck. So you stop listening to it.
Yeah, well, it's, I think about music and the impact it has on like how your identity forms at that age. And it was everything for me, which is a part of like why for me, now that I've stopped playing in bands and stuff, it was difficult to let go of that side of it and move into the industry side of things. Like I had always been in bands and I had always imagined myself being in bands, and it's just like, I like being at home now.
Yeah. That's a quick switch, right?
What's that?
Like I said, it's a quick switch when something like that happens. Like you could be playing shows and it, depending on the shows you're playing, like, if you're going on a tour, oftentimes you're showing up and playing for few to no people. I actually played a show last year in Nanaimo for nobody.
Yeah.
Like the bartender was into it.
Yeah.
But that was it. Like the only people there were like the people who opened for us and the bartender. It was at a bar called the Nanaimo Bar.
Yeah.
Which was the first sign. But that happens, and it definitely weighs on you a bit, because you're like, do I want to give everything I have? And then you definitely start to figure out, like, and people get past that. Obviously they do. Every band's been there at some point in time, but it is a slog. And for you, like, a large part of your job is like getting bands over that, in a lot of ways, I'm sure.
Well, and helping to do the right things so that like you don't have to have too many experiences that way. It's like to think of showing up in a city and not being able to get 5 or 10 people to come out to a show is tough. But
certainly.
I'm not, at least I don't think I'm working with anyone right now who that's happening for anymore. But I've experienced that firsthand playing in bands, and I've been at shows with people I've worked with where that happened. Like one of the first things I did circling back into music from Law in 2015 was to go on tour with Ben Kaplan, tour managing him. And Ben played a show in New Orleans where there was like literally nobody. And it's tough. But like he's also, at that same time, Ben was selling 1,000 tickets in the Netherlands,
Yeah. This is it, right? I remember you told me one time that you had gone to a talk with, I think, Chip Sutherland or someone like that in Halifax, and Chip, has worked in the music industry forever, and was in a band called, like, I feel like the band was called like Deadpool or something like that in the 90s.
That's it. If it's not that, that's very close.
Yeah, it's something like, I mean, it's, sorry, Deadpool fans, but, or whatever. And you were saying that, like, he said, like, the Canadian music scene is amazing and it's important to be here, but also realize that it's a percentage of the fan base that you can get. And you might have a really big fan base, like you said, in like Germany, or the Netherlands, sorry. Or like Billy Talent gets, they have bigger shows in Germany than they do in Canada.
Yeah.
Like huge shows. And it's about identifying that stuff, and like finding that stuff is so hard. And, but oftentimes, I'm sure, like, playing a show like that in New Orleans, that's going to sit with you as hard as playing a show for thousands of people on the opposite end of the spectrum, but in the same part of your mind, and
Right.
it's like, how do you like part ways with that feeling and still stick with the feeling of joy from like the several thousand, is something that I respect musicians for a lot, because it's tough.
Yeah, one of the analogies I got told early on was like, starting off, you're like a little tugboat out in the middle of the Atlantic, and you ride every wave to its peak, and then you drop to the very bottom of it, and eventually, like, you have experiences and you toughen up and your skin gets thicker, and then you're more of a like steamliner.
Yeah.
You're just kind of plowing through the waves. You're not riding anything too high or too low. So it's like, you don't spiral out when you sell 0 tickets, and you aren't like just fully riding on adrenaline and ego when you sell 1,000 tickets or 5,000 or whatever.
Totally. Of course, you probably value it even more when you have people there, right?
Yeah, well, that sort of goes back to what we were talking about with respect to longevity. It's like, I think when you put in the years to really build and earn it, I would imagine that you get to a point where you do just appreciate it when it's good.
Yeah, man. Totally.
Yeah.
100%.
Anyways, I hope so too. I'm only 5 or 6 years in. I'm like, I need to put another 25 in before anyone's gonna like trust what I'm saying. But I'm down for it. Yeah,
it's right?
Anyway, buddy, I mean, I don't have too many more questions. Well, I mean, I have a ton more questions for you, things we could talk about. Maybe before we go, like, just in terms of like being as someone who works in the music industry, on the industry side of it, and also plays in a band, like how do you balance between those two things?
I try not to relate the two things. Like, I feel like, honestly, like they're so different, and I feel like one thing that I learned from one aspect of those things seldom translates to the other side of things.
Interesting.
It's odd. One thing I will say is that I love listening to music and I love playing music, and they're very different things.
Yeah.
Because they affect you in very different ways. You can get enjoyment out of both of them, but in one way it's almost like it's do you want the music to serve you, or do you want your music to serve others? And I feel like they both come from different places. They both satisfy similar places in your mind and in your heart, but they come from such different places.
Yeah.
And those are like the two areas for me. And like when I was a music columnist for a couple of years, like I would bring like my guitar into the radio booth and try to make it both things, and realize really quickly that it's like, yeah, you really are trying to tap into two totally different things, because you're going to put your own interpretations on something, when maybe you're better off just giving the actual product of the music that you're trying to tell someone to dig. And let them dig it, right? So yeah, I don't know. I feel like the more I'm in it, Nigel, like the more I feel like they're completely different relatives of one another. Like they're definitely related, but they have their own thing for sure.
Well, and I guess that's probably why there are like agents and record labels and artist managers and publicists, because like you need people whose brains all work those ways to do those sides of it, to support the people who are making the art stuff. And I've worked with people who can do both. I mentioned Ben Kaplan. I think he's one of those people who has the business and the creative mind. James Hill, someone who I've worked with, who's like, I'm sure you've seen James's like ukulele cover videos on YouTube. Like he's killer.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're hard workers, right? Like aside from everything else, and like Ben, like I don't really know Ben too well. We both went to King's, and he was there when I was there, and I would watch. I opened a couple of shows for him with a Celtic band that I played in Halifax.
Okay.
But Ben knew early on, like he relatively knew for sure what he wanted his music to sound like, and he was getting there, and he got there really fast too. But he gives a damn about the people that listen to his music, and his campaigns, like they always revolve around what the people who ingest his music, like vitamins, he makes sure he's giving them what they want, and still like pushing the envelope. Like I love everything that Ben does, and like what he did with like Ben Kaplan and the Casual Smokers, and great.
Well, there's something to be said for like knowing your audience, you know what I mean, and serving an audience, and like writing and releasing music with intention and purpose for other people. I think, the way I still write songs when I pick up my acoustic guitar, is that shit's just for me. And that's why I'm never going to put it out into the world, because like I'm not writing songs that I hope other people will hear. I'm like doing it to process or to have fun or whatever. I think if you're going to if you're trying to build an audience around your thing, there's a level of serving that audience that you have to be attuned to. And there are people like Ben who are more in tune with that need. Yeah,
well, that's exactly what you're saying. Like I watched an interview with Joni Mitchell the other day, an older interview with her, where she says like she isn't a fan of people listening to her music and hearing Joni. She's a fan of hearing people listen to her music and hear themselves.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like she doesn't want to hear that, oh, I love that lyric that you have. You went through such a struggle. She wants to hear like, I went through XYZ, and this song spoke to me because it sounds exactly like what I went through. And I'm not a songwriter in that I can do that. I'm the same as you. I would write music for myself.
Yeah.
And it's almost like when it gets out to somebody else, you feel like in a weird way your guard's let down because you weren't ready to share that part of yourself with somebody, maybe.
Right. I'm in the middle of a podcast with Chuck Palahniuk, writer of Fight Club. Many people will know. And he's talking about how he learned to write early on. And the teacher that he had that taught him how to write at first said that like you shouldn't use thinking verbs. So like you should never say that somebody is 6 feet tall, or that they were sad, or that they were in love, because you lose the opportunity to really get into that character's perception and experience of the events. Because 6 feet tall, a 6 foot tall person, that could be terrifying to me, and that could be like minuscule to you. It's like how is the character experiencing the thing? And I think that's what is great about great songwriters, is that you get lost and sucked into the worlds that they are creating. I mean, all of my favorite songs, when I listen to them, I really am imagining myself within them. You know what I mean? And that's selfish and it's ego driven, but like that's the magic of a tune. A good song.
that makes total sense. And I mean that goes back forever. Like you could take classes on Shakespeare where people are sitting there talking about the exact same thing. Is this a mournful poem? Is this a poem about jubilance and happiness, or whatever it is? And I'm sure I know that Shakespeare wasn't listening to this podcast, but it's the same thing, right? Like you leave the door open wide enough for someone to come in and have their own interpretations, and then you build the house around whatever they want it to be. And that makes total sense. That's a super cool way to look at it too.
It's like when I listen to I's to Buy, Kerry, I am to buy building the boats and sailing them,
and you're sailing them too. That's great. I'm the one who's like, there's something about maggoty butter. Isn't there like something about like, I don't even remember anymore. I remember learning that song recorder in like grade 3 and having to sing that lyric. And much like push-up bra thing in Gander, our teacher wouldn't let us sing that line. whatever it was, because she was like, that's disgusting, it's repulsive. And I'm like, why, whatever. And then you grow up and we're eating like cultured yogurts and stuff, you know, like,
yeah.
you know, the only difference is that was airtight, you know. They didn't let the packets in.
Hey, listen, buddy, you're in Toronto now. You might have access to cultured yogurts, but back here on the island, we get Yoplait and Go-Gurt tubes.
Yogurt devoid of culture. No. Well, you know what? Speaking of the word culture, do you remember one time you were at my place in Halifax, which shared a backyard with your place in Halifax, and there was somebody there who was saying something about how she likes Newfoundland, but she wouldn't be able to go there because it doesn't give her the same like romantic appeal that somewhere like Toronto does. And you said, are you saying that Newfoundland is devoid of culture? And she was like, I mean, maybe. And we were like, nope.
I don't remember that, but you have a killer memory, so I trust you.
That stood out so well to me that my good buddy, who is now in law school, figured out how to argue with a mainlander who's trying to friggin' pump more air in Toronto's tires and take Newfoundland for some reason down a peg in the process. It made no sense. And you called her out for it. Yeah. Anyway, a couple of years later, she ended up spending like 3 weeks in St. John's and adores it. And she remembered that line too. And she was like, the culture in Newfoundland is so fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan. I just had to bring that back up for you.
Yeah, that's funny. All right, buddy. Well, I mean, I might let you go for now, but I super appreciate you making time to be a part of this video series.
Oh man, I was super flattered that you even reached out to me, and I love this series as well. I am in another tab. I have opened the Andrew and Kat one that you filmed at the Hue and Draw.
Yeah.
And I'm making my way through it as the day goes on. I love them. I think it's fantastic that you're doing this, and I would have loved to have had a resource like this early on, you know, when I was trying to figure out what music careers could even be.
Yeah, well, that's what I've been saying to people. It's like, you know, for me, the worst case scenario here is like I get to have a bunch of nice chats with people who I know and love or would like to know better. And so that's A, worth it right off the bat. And B, it's like, then if people do watch it, it's introducing them to folks they might not know, hopefully like sharing some knowledge through the process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I feel like, you know, I'm not super far into my career, but I feel this obligation or duty to like help make the industry more transparent and accessible. And I think the way you do that is through knowledge sharing.
Yep. The only way that you can get like that gatekeeper mentality that's haunted music industries, not just in Canada, but worldwide for so long, is to have these conversations and welcome people in. And realize that, you know, there are other things, and don't have a least favorite genre of music, you know, like.
Yeah, how can you say that?
My brain instantly turns off when someone says, I can't listen to blah, you know, I hate country music. It's like, really? You hate all country music?
Yeah.
You're going to tell me that you're going to sit down and listen to like Chris Stapleton's From a Room and not at some point want to call an ex or like make amends with your dad, you know, like give me a break. Or you're not going to listen to 90s country and want to party. Come on.
So my mom loves to tell the story about how when I was like 1 year old, I just started walking. I would go up to the record player in their house and I would bounce up and down and I would say, "Da-doo-doo, mama, da-doo-doo." And I wanted the music to be turned on. And I still, like, I very clearly remember in early childhood, my two favorite songs were Tutti Frutti by Little Richard.
Yeah.
And on the country tip, Achy Breaky Heart by Billy Ray Cyrus.
Because it's a jam.
It's a jam.
It's like, I totally get that. I used to dance at my nan's house when Chattahoochee would come on.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. And country's just one genre for an example here. You shouldn't do it with reggae or anything like that either. But it's true.
Or hip hop, like you shouldn't write off genres.
Or Celtic or bluegrass or R&B or modern hip hop. Like so many people love to just fertilize those conversations. And you know, like it might not sound like what you want good music to be, but there's going to be content and all this stuff because, you know, people care about it and it's affecting a lot of people. So you have to, don't tear it down because you don't necessarily understand it, and, you know, give it a chance, right? Like it's never been easier to be genre agnostic, and just listen to stuff that gives you the feel.
It's important to feel.
It is so very important to feel.
Dude,
why would you not want to feel?
I've been having like so many more just like random cries lately, moving into fatherhood, and I feel like part of it is, of course, I'm transitioning into that reality, and also like, you know, I'm around Stephanie all the time, who is very pregnant, and I'm sure there's some like transmission of hormones and energies and things, and it's
I get it.
A lot of feeling.
I've heard that that's a thing, man. My brother Matt just had his second kid, and
nice.
I'm having these I miss the East Coast so bad. Obviously, I can't go because there's the Atlantic bubble, and oh man, I've had a recurring dream for 6 months where I go to Newfoundland and it's so nice, or I go to Halifax, or I go to, you know, Kentville, where I have family there as well, and not being able to do that. And like my niece was just born a couple of weeks ago, and I hate it so much. I'm not crying more, I'm suppressing it, but that day when it comes out, when I listen to country music,
that's it, man. You push those emotions down, they're gonna bubble up.
They sure will. Until that day, though.
Listen, when I can afford to hire you as like the LHM Records A&R, we'll get you back to Corner Brook.
Sounds good. This is a verbally binding contract, Mr. Lawyer.
Dude, it's going to be on the internet now, so.
Right.
All right, buddy. Well, I'll stop the recording, and then we can say goodbye off air.
Sounds good.
Peace.
Later, my man.